All right, well, why don't we go ahead and get started? And I am Arnfinn Austefjord. I am the global head of the KCS Academy. And welcome to our KCS in Action call. And I'm pleased to introduce Alex VanFosson. And Alex is the KCS Program Manager at OSIsoft. And Alex is going to share lessons learned on OSIsoft's KCS journey and their experiment with a KCS Guild. So really looking forward to this. Before we begin, though, I'd like to just cover a little bit of housekeeping. The session is being recorded and will be sent out to all who registered. And please post your questions in chat. So we'll be monitoring the chat. We'll bring them up to Alex as appropriate in the flow or save them for the Q&A session. Alex also has a few breaking points so we can have questions in there also. And while you're not speaking, please put yourself on mute. And we also want to make sure you're aware of upcoming KCS Academy events. So on Tuesday, December 1st, we'll have an Electrolux case study, and that's going to be sponsored by ComeAround/BMC. And Electrolux will discuss their KM strategy to improve their customer experience. And Lena Stormbridge, she's the head of digital services at Electrolux, and also a KCS certified trainer. And she's going to present their KM strategy, success factors, learnings, and accomplishments. And for those not familiar with Electrolux, a very, very large company, and they've really deployed KCS to the enterprise. And they've had incredible benefits from their KCS implementation, and in instances where they might have a knowledge article being displayed on many different sites. So a lot of unique things there. So we're looking forward to hearing about that. Then on December 10th, we learn how Akamai's KDE program, their Knowledge Domain Expert program, developed a KB-driven problem management approach that solved the pitfalls of root cause codes and case classifications. And I know many of you, particularly those who are doing good linking, are using the knowledge article as that problem signature. So it's going to be very interesting to see Akamai's approach to that root cause codes, if they're using the linked articles or what their approach is. So you can register for these events at the KCS Academy site, and Jennifer is going to post the link in the chat. So you can just look for that and register right from there. But I'm very excited about today's event and pleased to pass it over to Alex.
Okay, I got the mute button. Sorry.
Great.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to be talking about KCS at OSIsoft, and the very short version of this presentation is you should always follow the KCS Academy guidelines. Always, because they're good guidelines. There we go. So OSIsoft builds a data historian and the data infrastructure around that historian. So we can collect and store data from any source using our interfaces. We store it in our PyData archive, and we use another product called the AF server to do analytics on it, give contextualization to that data, and then we can visualize that data with a product called PyVision and others, and share that data across different organizations using something called PyCloud. And so it's really a full-fledged data infrastructure designed around giving companies the power to make data-driven decisions over lots and lots of different data streams. We have 140 different offices and 40 years of experience supporting our customers 24/7. We operate by the mantra, support the hell out of our customers, and we're very proud of the fact that 24 of our first 25 customers are still with us. Our tech support team is about 350 engineers spread all over the globe. We hire engineers usually right out of college with some sort of science degree. We train them for about 6 months, including shadowing. And then we also have a Pi-Square forum where our customers can answer each other's questions. Our customers are very knowledgeable technical people. They operate in a very complex environment with complex software. And so we want to make sure we give them the best possible people to work with our tech support. We're very proud of our support organization. But we had a problem a few years ago where we were having trouble scaling out the organization because we train such intelligent people and give them lots of knowledge about our products and how to support them, they frequently move on to other positions in the company. And so turnover is very high within the tech support organization itself. So when you're doing lots of training with high turnover in a complex environment, you start to lose quality of support. And we knew that we needed a knowledge base to try and increase self-service, to reduce the amount of cases and retain our engineers more. And we wanted a way to sort of figure out how. So some of the problems we were dealing with that old knowledge base was that although anybody could write in articles, only our subject matter experts, our product specialists could. And all of our articles were reviewed by our product specialists. And because of that, our review times were about 1 month on average, sometimes up to a year. And so when you have your article getting submitted to the queue and then you're waiting a month and you've completely forgotten about it, you as a frontline engineer, you just don't see the value in that article at all. So you don't bother capturing that information. In fact, we were telling people not to capture information in an article unless 2 or 3 cases about that same issue had come up, just because it was so time consuming to get that article created. As a result, we have a very large dependence on our case database. And because most of our information they were using to solve problems was in that case database, which was hidden from customers, customers were upset because the information they wanted to use on our website wasn't sufficient for them solving most of their problems. And they were kind of, disgruntled that they felt like they'd call into support. Support would find something that was hidden from our customers and solve it very quickly. And the customer had spent, who knows how long trying to fix it themselves and just didn't have the information they needed. And so this led to a knowledge base of about 2,000 articles with a link rate of only 15%. And that was built up over the course of a decade. So in other words, it was working, but it wasn't going to be working much longer. Any questions about the company before I move on? All right, let's keep going. So in 2018, we made the decision to sort of go through a digital revolution at OSIsoft. There's lots of different reasons for that. I'm sure most of them are familiar for you, but for the sake of time, we're going to skip all that. Short version is we were getting a new case tracking tool, Salesforce, new knowledge base, Salesforce, a new search engine, Coveo, new CRM, Salesforce, and we were going to redesign our website. And all of this was geared around trying to promote self-service for the customer. And since we were learning about KCS at about the same time we were going through this digital revolution, the thought was, let's launch KCS when we launch this new Salesforce tool. There were some good things and some bad things about this. It was going to be one big change all at once, instead of lots of little changes over the course of a very long period of time. That we were going to make sure the tool worked with KCS, since we were planning to launch KCS with this tool. So we didn't have to worry about taking our grumpy, terrible tool and sort of forcing a square peg into a round hole with KCS. My son has come into the office. So one moment.
One of the beauties about working at home, we just actually came off another meeting and had a similar. So it's.
I'm so sorry. I thought I locked that door. All right, where was I? Right, so no looking back. So one of the big problems with launching a KCS program is that people have sort of this inertia where why don't we just keep doing things the way we've always been doing them? So we couldn't do that anymore with this change because all of our tools, all of our workflows were changing all at once. So there was no way to go back because we no longer had the tools to go back to. So that was great, but there were also some downsides to this change. It was going to be extremely complex because everything was changing at once. We were redesigning something without really a full picture of what it was we were designing towards, only some ideas, some principles. There was going to be a lot of disruption because all of the tools and workflows were going to change. And so this was also really hard to communicate out to engineers about the big picture of what was coming. But I think the biggest problem was we didn't have a pilot to sort of understand what sort of problems we were going to have with the KCS program before we launched it. We were operating mostly off of theory rather than any pragmatic knowledge. Okay, so about June of 2018, we were tired of fighting with each other about what was KCS. So we sat down with Medallia, who had also gone through a KCS rollout with Salesforce environment and a Coveo search engine. And that presentation was absolutely critical to the success of our program. I wish I could remember who gave it, because he was great. And the very short version of what we learned from that presentation is you have to have KCS coaches. You absolutely have to have KCS coaches. And I can attest that we had a coaching program in place before we went live, and we would not have succeeded if we did not have a coaching program. We had been planning to sort of implement KCS and then add a coaching program very soon after, because we knew it was important. But after that presentation, we understood that it was the difference between success and failure having that coaching program. Because you can't have a council of 8 or 9 people communicating to 350 knowledge workers about what they need to be doing. You can't keep your knowledge workers accountable if you only have 8 or 9 people trying to do so, right? You have to have this middle layer of coaches who can communicate the policy down and have a vested interest in their peers doing well at KCS. And then you also need somebody who is a peer to collect feedback from their peers and understanding of what's going wrong within the day-to-day workflow, and then passing that feedback back up to the council. So if you're about to launch a KCS program and you're not going to do the coaching thing because whatever reason, you need to rethink this coaching program. You absolutely have to have it. Okay. Another thing we did before go live was a migration of our old knowledge base to our new. Now, the KCS Academy recommends that you do not do this for good reasons. You don't want to have this crappy old knowledge base that nobody's using reported into a new tool where it can stay crappy and not be used. However, that KCS Academy recommendation is sort of based on a few assumptions. One, that your knowledge base is old and crappy. Our knowledge base was old, but it mostly wasn't crappy. 2, it's assuming that your knowledge base is sort of internal to just your support engineers, that it's not made publicly available for your customers to self-serve with. Ours was, and it was doing self-service, quite a bit of self-service. So we had to make sure that we could continue to support our customers through that channel. So instead of doing just a massive export from the old knowledge base and an import into the new knowledge base with a new tool with totally new system and resulting in lots and lots of problems, we knew that we wanted to do sort of a cleanup process along with that migration. So our migration process was manual, and because it was going to be manual, we knew it was going to be a lot of work. So we had to pare down the number of articles we were going to move. We used Google Analytics and the number of linked cases on articles to determine which were our most important, most viewed, most used articles. And then of that list, we had about the top 300 that we wanted to move before launch. And that accounted for somewhere between, I don't remember the exact number, I want to say it was between 60 and 80% of all of the traffic on our website was those 300 articles out of a knowledge base of 2,000. But we knew that wasn't going to catch everything our customers needed. So we also put in place a plan so that after go live, our PSEs could take product support engineers. That's what PSEs are. They could take articles from our old knowledge base and port them into the new one in a consistent manner and upgrade those articles as they move them. So before migration, we had our coaches doing this, which is great because that meant coaches could learn the tool. They could learn our content standard. And they were responsible for most of the knowledge base at the moment of go live. So they had some experience with what we were trying to accomplish with KCS. And they could use that experience to then train the people that they were mentoring. Then after go live, we used the number of new cases, or I shouldn't say not new cases linked to articles because they weren't. They were still in an old knowledge base. But if you came across a new case that was solved with an old piece of information, you were then responsible for moving that old piece of information into the new knowledge base. And then we also used Coveo analytics to determine which knowledge articles our customers were looking for and not finding because they didn't exist. And using that to then also move articles over into the new knowledge base, which is great because customers will, if they don't find something on their website, it's not guaranteed that they're going to open up a call and tell you, hey, I couldn't find this thing on your website, right? That just isn't going to happen. So you have to use this piece to make this work. By the end of the year, we had about 900 articles migrated over, and we knew from our Google Analytics that was 95% of case traffic. So we only needed about half our knowledge base to be moved, but we did it in these stages to make sure we were really putting our effort where it needed to go. And overall, I think this is a success. Okay, so any questions about coaching program, digital revolution, KB migration, anything like that? Okay, moving on. Communication in KCS is absolutely key. People need to be able to know what it is they have to do. So before launch, we had our coaches, and we also had change champions, which were people identified for sort of the Salesforce rollout, less so the KCS rollout. But these two groups of people came to our North American offices. They went through these training presentations where they learned about the tool, the new policies and procedures, with the intent that they would then go back to their offices all over the globe and present presentations to the people in these offices so that everyone in tech support would have a presentation and understanding of what it is that was changing and what they needed to do at launch, right? This was absolutely critical. It took, I'd say about 2 months. I don't remember exactly. It took a long time. It took a lot of effort. It was very expensive, but it meant that when we went live with the Salesforce tool, everybody knew what it was they needed to do. And more importantly, they knew who to ask questions of. They could go to these change champions. They could ask a question. If the change champion didn't know, they could feed that question back up to the people making decisions about the launch. And then those people, as they got feedback from their change champions, could write up FAQ articles that could send them back out to everybody so that everybody was on the same page as things were changing rapidly. And we were getting, things would go wrong. We'd have to fix them. We'd have to communicate the change, all that stuff. So that was very efficient because we had this sort of communication network in place. And then after launch, we continued to sort of leverage our change champions, our coaches to communicate as things got ironed out, smoothed out after launch. So I started something called the KCS updates. Those are weekly emails that I just, catalog all the questions about the KCS program and our knowledge base and the search engine. All of that stuff went into this email and came out to people. And most importantly, I took those question and answers and I put them in our knowledge base. I used KCS to teach KCS. So that meant that if a policy needed to change, I could go and update that article. If I got asked another question down the road, I could go back to that article and give a consistent answer. And other people could go to that article instead of asking me or their coach about that issue. So this was really key. You need to use your knowledge base as a knowledge base. You cannot use announcement emails as your knowledge base. So announcement emails are great for telling people something they need to know that they're not asking about. But you need to have that backup, that system of record for your policies so that people aren't, trying to just keep all of their emails and then sort through those emails to find an answer. That's just not feasible. Okay, we got feedback from coaches, a lot of feedback from coaches. This was great, especially when it was simple edge cases like what is exactly the policy around this certain situation, or I don't know exactly what I'm supposed to do here. That was awesome. But when people started to give us feedback about the larger picture, about massive decisions we needed to make about our program, that feedback was not as, it was important, but they didn't have the whole picture in mind when they gave that feedback. And so you couldn't just take it at face value. And so as the project went on, that feedback became harder and harder to use to sort of determine the direction of the KCS program and what it was we needed to work on. So we had these weekly council meetings where we would talk about what people were telling us to make sure we were all on the same page. But we quickly realized that most of the council meetings were just people in North America. So we were missing other regions and their feedback. And so we needed a better way to sort of collect this feedback. And we're going to talk about that more later. Our biggest challenge right after go live was the article approval queue. So KCS recommends you don't have one. And we really, really should not have had one. So it was a complex process that led to the problem that we ended up having. And it was sort of split into two causes, a policy cause and a people cause. So our policy was that articles that had that were related to security or could cause data loss to customers, they needed to get validated. They needed to be reviewed by our product specialists in order before they went public, because the idea was we didn't want to accidentally send out information that could hurt our customers' systems. Totally understandable desire. But right at Go Live, we didn't have a lot of publishers. We just had, product specialists and then a whole bunch of frontline contributors. So we also knew that we needed to get articles out to our customers quickly. So we decided to just make not validated articles available externally and then just warn our customers that the information might not be 100% accurate, right? But that meant that all of our contributors were giving information straight to our customers right after version 1 of an article. And so understandably, people were really afraid of doing that. They were timid of spreading inaccuracies. They didn't want to be that person who accidentally screwed up a customer system just because they didn't know better. And they were also very used to submitting articles to the queue because they were, up until that point, everything had been product specialist reviewed. So instead of following the normal validation procedure of leave it as not validated, review it, and then a publisher comes along and validates it, we were leaving it as not validated, and then somebody would come along and go, a product specialist needs to look at this because I think it's wrong. And then they would submit it to the queue. And so our queue grew to like hundreds within the first few months, hundreds and hundreds of articles. And when you have hundreds and hundreds of articles and no clear responsibility of who's exactly supposed to go through that queue and get it to a normal amount of articles, it just continues to grow and nobody starts working on it. And while articles were in the queue, they couldn't be edited because they were awaiting approval. And you can't change something that's waiting for approval because of how Salesforce works. So our reuse as review wasn't working because people literally could not edit the articles that they were reviewing and reusing because they were stuck in the queue. And so our knowledge base quality suffered because basically everything that was in there was a first draft and had to stay as a first draft because it was stuck in the queue. And that meant that workers submitted even more articles review because they knew from seeing their peers submit articles that those articles are of low quality, which meant they also were going to write low quality articles, which meant they needed to get them reviewed. So then it would even encourage more and more people to submit stuff to the queue. And this was a huge problem. And so for that whole first year, we kept sending more and more information about what should go into the queue, what was appropriate to be in the queue, what normal KCS procedures should look like, how product specialists should review the queue, who was responsible for what. It was a massive headache. So at the end of the year, we got some feedback from DBK, who's a big name in KCS if you haven't heard of him. And he gave us 4 pieces of advice to solve this and some problems we were having with our KCS program. 1, our articles were too complex. Specifically, people were not clear on what actually needed to go into an article to be sufficient. 2, we needed to emphasize every use as a review. This idea that, everything starts as crap and then you review it a bunch of times and then it's not crap and everything's fine. And we also needed a licensing program because right now we just had all of Frontline being, essentially unlicensed and able to publish not validated articles, and then all of our product specialists being licensed for validating published articles. And you couldn't move between those 2 groups because you would be changing your position at the company as well as where you were at in the KCS program. And lastly, we needed to make our new articles internal because obviously when you write a first draft, it's always going to be terrible. No matter who's writing it, no matter what it's about, a first draft is always terrible. And so we just needed to accept that and keep it hidden from our customers and wait until we were comfortable with how many reviews it had before putting it out to our customers. All right. Any questions about our communication policy, the approval queue, or David K's advice?
So Alex, we got quite a few questions that came through in the chat.
Okay, great.
I will read to you a couple of them that hasn't been answered yet. So one is, what was the responsibility of change champions before the launch? And how many change champions were there?
There was at least 1 change champion for Office. I think probably 2 when appropriate. some offices were bigger than others. So some offices had multiple change champions based on how many people they had, and some offices just had one or two because you don't want to go it alone. But there wasn't really enough people to sort of justify having two people. So I wouldn't say there was a hard and fast policy, but as much as possible, if you do end up doing this process, have two people per office, because then they can work together, and it's much easier than working alone.
And another question is, how do they celebrate success for KCS coaching? Is there a tool you have for coaching, or is it a process designed to go through by coaches?
Do you mean the success of the mentees? Like, how does a coach reward them? Or do you mean success at coaching, and how do we reward coaches for being good coaches?
Go
ahead.
So yes, the first part that you said, that how do you celebrate the success of the mentees? And is there a tool that you have for coaching, or is it just a process design which has to be gone through by coaches? This is what is question.
Right. So the tool part's easy. No, we don't have a coaching tool. We use spreadsheets to track AQI and RQI, and once a quarter, all the coaches email me their spreadsheets, and I aggregate the data for the organization. And in terms of rewarding mentees for good performance, we don't have a good way to do that right now. It's something that we want. We've talked about a lot. We've come up with some brainstorm ideas, but we haven't. We know that we don't want to reward activities. We know we want to reward people who have gone above and beyond. But how do you figure out who's gone above and beyond in a fair manner? Well, you'd have to have some objective measurements. But when you come to objective measurements, then activities are the easiest thing to measure. But we don't want to measure activities, because then people can game the system by gaming the activities. And so we kind of are stuck in this vicious cycle. It's not something we've given up on. We still want to do it. It's just had to take a back seat to sort of the larger systemic problems that we have been working on so far. Darith, is there anything you want to add to that answer?
No, I think you're pretty spot on.
Thank you. Yeah.
There's another question that Nick has asked. How many employees are in OSIsoft, or how many end users are the audience for your KCS in comparison to coaches, PSEs, council members?
Boy. So there's about 1,500 employees at OSIsoft right now, plus or minus 100. The number changes quite rapidly, so I don't have the exact number in my head. So the tech support department, which includes, all of our frontline engineers, backline engineers, all of the managers who support them, the leadership structure above them, and some of the support operations team beside them, that's 350 people. So that includes some people who are not actively doing KCS, although I couldn't tell you exactly how many are in each group. The lion's share of it is our tech support department, though. In terms of how many customers we're supporting, I do not have those numbers on the top of my head. Darith, do you know?
Numbers, yeah, that's kind of a hard number for us. There's also coaches and KCS council members. I guess if we're doing a 1-to-6 ratio for PSEs and coaches, we also have roughly 6 to 8 council members, but it's all kind of spread across the globe.
Yeah, I think we have about 70 coaches. It might be like slightly less than 70 now. Okay, are there more questions?
Just going through the chat one more time. I think that's just about all the questions we have at this juncture. I can continue to answer more questions as we go through the presentation.
Okay. All right, I'm going to move on and talk about what we did next. So in terms of timeline, this is, I think, December or January between 2019 2020. We knew we had problems. We knew because we kept getting the same feedback from people over and over again. But we wanted to kind of understand the scope of problems because the people we were hearing back from were mostly in North America. And we didn't want to fall into that trap of the squeaky wheel gets the grease, even if it doesn't need it. So we did a survey. We knew more or less what we wanted to ask in this survey based on, feedback from David Kay and also from our engineers. And we found 5 main problems with the program. And we picked these 3 with stars to address this year in 2020. So in terms of what the biggest problem was, it was definitely that from our perspective, it was that our participation was low. I think we were sitting around 60% participation at the time we sent out the survey. And it had stalled. It had stopped growing. And so that was worrisome. But we thought that the reason participation was low is because the ask was too hard. And so this idea that it was taking too long to create a new article, we wanted to address that because our perspective was to create that first version of an article, you were really mostly just copy pasting stuff from the case and cleaning it up so that it was more general than just for that customer. And so people were complaining our formatting standards were unclear. So we thought, well, if what's supposed to go into the article isn't clear to people, maybe that's why it's taking too long to create, is because they're overworking towards these articles. And then the last piece is that people were not using the new search tool. This turned out to be a pretty simple answer. There's 2 searches. There's a Salesforce search built in the Salesforce tool, and then there was the search we built using Coveo. People were using the Salesforce search thinking that was the Coveo tool. So once we cleared that up, people started using the search engine that we were actually optimizing and was working, and then people started finding what they needed. So yeah, that turned out to be a whole lot of work for a really simple answer. But these were good things to target. But we knew we couldn't do it alone. There was just 8 of us on the council, and we all had day jobs. So we were great at making decisions about the overall direction of the program, but our execution was weak. And so we created the KCS Guild to serve as a hub between the KCS Council and the KCS coaches. The Guild would more or less have 2 jobs. They would take feedback from KCS coaches, and they were coaches themselves, so they would look at what was happening in their lives as they did the coaching job. And they would feed that feedback to the KCS Council. But because the Guild members were specifically chosen because of their knowledge and expertise around KCS, their feedback was much more valuable to the KCS Council. But then the KCS Guild's second job was to help us work on some of these projects and initiatives that the KCS Council had decided we needed to act on. So the first step is picking the people in the Guild. We knew we wanted about 2 to 4 coaches per region, with the 3 regions, APAC, North America, EMEA. We wanted to get people from each region and each support tier, frontline and backline. And we wanted to make sure that these people had gone above and beyond in their coaching duties. They were committed to KCS. They were excited about KCS. And they had a good understanding of what KCS was and why it was important. We knew we needed a diverse team to get an accurate picture of the program as a whole across all of the regions of the globe. And we knew we needed just a few people to make coordination between the council and the Guild very easy, and between the Guild themselves, because again, time zones are the enemy when you're working with a team this big. Speaking of time zones, let's talk about the meeting structure. So we talked a lot about how we wanted to work with the Guild in a way that was sort of convenient for everybody and not preferring one region over another. Because we had a history at the company because most of our engineers were centralized in North America and most of our leadership was centralized in North America. It was sort of like North America would do some innovation and then they would sort of farm it out to APAC and EMEA saying, hey, we did this thing and we had these results, now you should do it too. And EMEA and APAC would be like, meh, okay, or meh, not really. And then they just, wouldn't get back to us. So we didn't really have a good idea of what was going on in each region, and there wasn't a lot of consistency between each region because we were mostly operating independently. So when we launched KCS, from the very get-go, we wanted to fight this problem that we'd had over the past. And the way the Guild addresses that is, instead of having one meeting with everybody in it, where some people are waking up at midnight to go to the meeting, and some people were getting up at 6 a.m., and some people, it's fine. We wanted to have alternating meetings. So we have a meeting for EMEA and the KCS Council on the East Coast. And then we have on the next week a meeting between the KCS Council and only the members that are on the West Coast and the Guild members that are on the West Coast. And then we take notes in this meeting. We pass the notes to the next meeting where they talk about it. And then they take notes on their meeting, put it in a OneNote, pass it to us on the East Coast. Sorry, I say us because I'm in Tennessee, and so on and so forth. And so this is how we kept communication between the whole council and all of the regions, is by having a centralized meeting where the Guild members could meet and discuss and talk. And this sort of served as like sort of a soft deadline for getting projects done, because you don't want to show up to the meeting without any progress on the thing you're responsible for. And at the same time, it allowed communication back and forth between those two groups without somebody having to wake up at 3 in the morning, right? All right, so once we had that meeting structure in place and we kind of understood the purpose of the Guild and how they were going to act, we started on some projects. And the first thing we tackled was this sufficient to solve idea, where, what should go into an article and how we're going to reuse and review to improve that article. And I'll talk about that more on the next slide. And then we also looked at search improvements. And like I said, turns out people are just using the wrong search. They needed to use the right search, problem solved. To address some of the other stuff from DBK's feedback is we wanted to improve our coach training, because we wanted coaches to understand how to mentor our mentees, and then our mentees would better understand what was expected of them, because their coach would be better at communicating it. So we're working on getting that coach training in place now. We're going through the train the trainer phase. I'll let you know how that goes. And last is we need to actually have a licensing program. So we're redesigning how permissions work in our Salesforce tool around the knowledge base, and that should be rolling out in the next few weeks or so. So let's talk about sufficient to solve. It's this idea that, we stole the term from KCS, well, I shouldn't say stole. We used the term from KCS, sufficient to solve, and it's highlighting this idea that, your article, especially the first draft, just needs to be good enough to solve the case that you solved with it, right? We don't need to go above and beyond that, because to go above and beyond that would be to collect more information than is really feasible to collect in the time that the engineer has. And so extra research is not needed. And perfection is not really the goal, because this is just a first draft. We know that if we're doing reuse as review, it's going to be improved by future cases and future research by other engineers. So it's okay to have incomplete information as long as the information you have is sufficient to solve the problem that you were trying to solve when you decided to create that article. So by really emphasizing this idea, we got more participation because we essentially lowered the expectation for what needed to be in that first draft. We were emphasizing reuse as review, as David told us to do. So we got more editing, which was great, because now that people understand they're not supposed to use the article approval queue to just get everything reviewed by a product specialist, we're doing reviews as review. People are more willing to do edits. Fewer people are submitting to the queue, and so more edits are possible. And we also had better coaching, because our coaches were not consistent on what was a good article or not. So by explaining that, that first draft's not going to be great, it's the later drafts that you really need to sort of go over with a fine-tooth comb. We got better coaching, better consistency about what does it really mean to have a good article. And my personal favorite, less stuff in the approval queue clogging up the system. And you can see the effects of this initiative in our AQI and RQI data. So this light green line is our RQI, and our target is here in the dark green. And then this light blue line is our AQI, and our target is here in the dark blue. So we went from slightly below our AQI goal to right above it in that 1 quarter. But the biggest gain was in RQI. People were doing KCS the way they were supposed to, when they were supposed to do it. Instead of stalling and waiting to create articles when they had time, they were actually doing it in the moment. And they were doing just enough, being sufficient. So our RQI jumped about 6 points in that quarter, which was the largest jump we'd seen since we started this program. There's a nice big jump over here. This was changing the coach procedure for how we graded RQI. So it didn't actually change anything in terms of what the PSCs were already doing. We just made it more consistent about how to grade stuff that wasn't an article but was attached to the case. So this is less of a project and more of a procedural change here. Okay, what's next? Getting close to the end here, guys. Stay with me. Well, we want better analytics. Right now, we know that our KCS program is doing really well in terms of RQI and AQI and link rate and all that. But what effect does that have on our overall support strategy? How is that affecting the business? And that's sort of a black hole right now. We know self-service is occurring, but we don't have a great way to sort of indicate how much self-service there is and whether or not it's improving. So we want to look at case deflection. We want to look at website traffic. We want to get some more feedback avenues so customers can tell us what they're having problems with or what they like. We're going through the security design right now where we're adding the 3 licensing levels. We're doing a better job of designing the permissions around what the tool is meant to do, so it's a bit simpler. And we're including permissions for other departments to come in and use our knowledge base, which ties into this column right here. We want to improve our localization. Right now, we're having a real problem in our APAC region where we're not getting as much engagement from our knowledge workers there because they know that if they write an article in English, their customers are not going to be able to use it. So they don't have a lot of incentive because they're not going to see a lot of case deflection. Essentially, it's a lot of extra work for not a lot of gain for them. It would only help the other regions. And we want to address this problem by allowing them to write articles in their own language and translate articles that are in English into their own language so that we can do a better job of case deflection within those languages. And last, we want to expand KCS to other groups. So right now we've expanded it to other groups within customer success beyond tech support, such as services, CSM, that sort of thing. And they're just getting their programs launched. So I don't have a lot of news to report, but it is still very exciting. And then we want to look at expanding to IT and HR because these parts of the business support all of the other parts of the business. And they have lots of information that everybody needs, but it's really hard to get that information, despite the fact that they've all put them into beautiful SharePoint sites. All right, that's KCS at OSIsoft and a quick summary of the Guild. If you have any questions about anything in the presentation, now's the time to ask them.
We have one question. What did the KCS staff survey look like? I started to answer some of this and how we did a biannual survey. There's quite a lot to go through. We generally do like 2 surveys every year. It's becoming a tradition. We actually just wanted to do it once, but then it started to gain a lot of traction. The annual survey basically had about 20 questions. And it's usually done in a multiple choice or rank type of fashion. So the question, it ranges a lot. We go from involvement to when they start typically writing an article, and on average, how much time do they spend doing so? How much time do they spend improving versus writing a new article? And what do they do when they can't find the answer? Do they go to a particular resource first? And which of these do they go to? And just to kind of see what system that they're using, we want to see if they're using like our newer search versus our older search first for the answers. And a lot of these are multiple choice or rank choice types of questions, which allows for them to kind of go through it a little bit more quickly. And we only have a couple that are more pre-filled, not pre-filled, more free responses. I'm not sure if you have anything to add to that, Alex.
No, I do want to give Durath credit because he was the brainchild. The survey was his brainchild. And we learned a lot from that survey. We went from sort of, this is probably an exaggeration. We went from bickering amongst ourselves about where we needed to go to very clear data-driven decision about where exactly we needed to go in terms of what we need to address in the KCS program. So I highly recommend that you do a survey. I would be cautious of asking too many questions because survey fatigue is a real thing. But in order to, I still submit the idea that you need direct feedback from people to understand even what questions you need to ask in that survey. So do get that feedback from your coaches, from your engineers, all over as much as you can. But then once you have that sort of sample to understand what it is you need to be asking, then go to the survey, because the survey is going to give you data and it's going to be objective. And it's really hard to argue with objective data if you're fighting with somebody about what should be your next priority.
We have another question from Sandhya. On what basis is the RQI and AQI calculated? As in, what is the KB content against which the percentage is generated?
I'm not entirely sure I understand the question.
So maybe we can just start off with talking about how we calculate AQI and RQI and...
Yeah. There's 7 categories for the AQI. There are things like, is it clear? Did you fill out all of the fields? Did you add the metadata? Are the links and images correct? Stuff like that. So, as much as possible, we tried to make it very objective about whether or not a category was satisfied. So our coaches wouldn't have to go through the guesswork of figuring out whether or not a user had done enough to satisfy the score, and whether or not, I guess, we didn't want them to try and guess at whether or not somebody should earn half a point, right? So there's 7 categories. Each category is 1 point, and it's supposed to be treated as basically an on or off switch. Like if this field is blank, it's off. If it has anything written in it, it's on, right? And so you get that point if it's on. This was good in that it's very easy to apply that standard to every article and be consistent across all of your coaches and all of your mentees. But it's bad in the sense that you really lose a lot of the nuance between a good article and a bad article. Like to meet the content standard, you just have to do the barest minimum. So people who are really putting effort into making these articles a high enough quality that they can be reused very easily, and the people who are just trying to get it done, their scores are very similar. And so that's one of the reasons why our AQI is so high, like above 90%, I think, is because we're not asking a lot from that content standard. Oh, and then for RQI, as much as possible. So again, that Medallia presentation that we did back in June was super amazing. So they had an RQI process that was based off of, RQI stands for Resolution Quality Index. They based their process off of David Kay's blog post about RQI, and we based our process off of what they did. So we tried as much as possible to basically have the coach ask 2 questions. Like, so if it's a linked article, is it a new article or an existing? And if it's new, is there a duplicate out there somewhere? And did they capture all the information that they were supposed to, right? And so if you answer those 2 questions in a positive sense, then they earn a point for that article. And so their RQI for that specific article and case pairing is 100%. And then you just add up all of the cases and article pairings that you review for that mentee to give them their overall RQI score. You add all of that up for the coach, and you add all of the coaches up for the organization. That's how you get your overall RQI for the organization. So again, it's meant to be very objective about whether or not somebody met or did not meet our workflow. And we just ask enough questions to figure out which category is it in. And then for that category, there's like 2 questions to determine whether or not they met the criteria for success. I realize that's a bit of a vague answer, but this is easier to explain with a diagram, I think.
So hopefully, I'm not sure if that answered your question, Sandhya. Feel free to ask it again in a different way if we didn't answer it. We also have another question by Ruchika. What is the percentage of survey submission you foresee from knowledge worker, and how do you communicate the survey for maximum participation?
Well, we communicated the survey by email, and I don't know of another way to do it. So I don't know that I can answer what is the best way to get maximum participation. I don't know, give them candy? I wish I had a better answer for you. I think, Dara, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but we kind of went into it with the expectation that if people wanted to give us feedback, they would, right? And if they couldn't be bothered, then maybe their feedback wasn't super valuable. So we were just going to get enough of a sample that we had a good idea of what we needed to do next. We didn't need everybody to respond to get a good enough sample.
Yeah, I think out of all of the responses that we got, we probably had around 50% response rate.
That's really good.
We did a lot of reminders too with that. So it was definitely a lot of effort.
I think we were also, and I don't want to understate this, we were pretty blessed with a support organization that cares deeply about supporting the customer and improving the process. When you hire a bunch of engineers, you hire a bunch of people who really, really, really want to optimize things, right? So they are very vocal about what they see as the problem and what needs to be fixed.
We have another question from Jesse. How do you measure the success of your KCS implementation for your end users?
Oh boy, I would give a whole bunch of money to be able to answer that question. Well, I kind of address this question two ways, and neither of them I'm particularly happy with. One is the internal success, and the other is the external success. So how are we helping our employees, and how are we helping our customers? So internal is a bit easier to measure because I can just walk up to some employees and ask them, hey, how do you feel KCS is going? And generally speaking, they really hated it in the beginning because we were still building the knowledge base. So they were doing a whole bunch of work and not getting a lot of value. And we warned them that that would happen. So they trusted us and they kept going with it. And again, your coaching program is key here because they are the people who keep the program going. But then once we had the knowledge base sort of built out and people were finding stuff and it was helping them and it was solving really difficult cases really fast, and they knew that like, hey, if I'd gotten this case a year ago, it would have taken me a week to solve. And I found this article that was exactly the problem and had exactly the solution I needed, and I solved it in 30 minutes, right? Those kinds of wins, as they happen more and more often, really sell the program internally to the point where people do not want to go back to the way it was because they know how valuable it is, right? And once you have that kind of understanding of the KCS program at your organization, you don't really need the numbers to show that it's helping the customers more with self-service because you know it's helping your people and you know it's helping them be more efficient. So when it comes to the customer side of things, you've got to measure things like visits to your website, searches in your search engine, whether or not those searches were successful, who's looking at your articles and how often are they doing it, and then how does that number of visits compare to your overall cases coming in. And right now we have some of that data, enough to say that, yeah, more people are looking at our articles than are opening a case. But it's not like a 2-to-1 ratio or a 10-to-1 ratio the way sort of the KCS Academy expects it. I shouldn't say the KCS Academy. The consortium basically says, once you have self-service going on your website, you should expect 10 times the number of visits as cases that get opened on average. And we're looking at somewhere between like 1.5 to 2 times, on a month-to-month basis. We're only 2 years into this project, so maybe that will change with time as our knowledge base continues to be improved. But I think we're going to need to make some pretty radical changes to our website and our customer experience on our website if we want to see that number go up. Oh, and then the final point I want to make is it's kind of hard to tie the number of website visits back to amount of money saved. You can do some finicky things like say, well, if every website visit was a case that was deflected, then we saved this much money because we know exactly how much money we're spending on cases. But that's not really fair because some of those people would have gone to your website and never would have opened a case. So maybe another way to look at it, and I think this is the most successful and something that KCS Academy pushes, is these are all of the answers we've provided, from cases to websites to, peer-to-peer interactions on our community. These are all of the answers we provided. If we take the total cost of our tech support budget and divide it by the number of answers we provided, we should see the cost per answer go down if we're getting more efficient, right? And so that's the best way to sort of show to the business that you are providing value through KCS. But you need a lot of different pieces of data in place to make that number happen. And we just don't have that at OSIsoft right now.
And we do have, this is Arnfinn, I did post some of the benefits in the chat. We have that documented, and it's by phase. So just as Alex said, that early on, you're going to see your time to resolution reduce. You're going to see fewer escalations, increased first time fix. Then as you populate your self-service, you're going to see improved self-service success. And we just did, it's probably not enough time to get that in there, but we just did a very extensive analysis of how do you measure self-service success and time to resolution of self-service, as well as the average cost. And that is on our website, so you can go there also. And that was member driven, so we had a lot of different members participate in that. And what we did, to Alex's point about complexity, we broke it down into good, better, and best. So you can start off with doesn't have to be extremely complex, and you can get some really good benefits, and then over time invest in more and more accurate measurements there. And so that's on the consortium website. And fortunately, I think we're going to time out before I can find that link in there.
Yeah, and if you can visit the consortium website, I highly recommend that you do. There's a lot of great information on there, and we're basically using that website as our roadmap for a program.
All right. Well, thank you. I know we're timing out. Thank you so much, Alex, for taking us through this. It's very, very valuable to understand, learn from others just as you did. This was very helpful for others to understand your journey and what you learned, so that they don't make the same mistakes and that they maximize the benefits that you saw. So thank you so much for doing this. And yeah, with your journey, it looks like you have so many more projects. We'd love to have you back in the future to get even more lessons learned and benefits that you're seeing from your journey.
Yeah, and I'm happy to share some good news when we get there.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you everyone for participating, and you all have a great rest of the day. And we'll send out the recording in the next day or so.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.